everyone. Welcome to Roads to Migrate, initiated by International Refugee Rights Association. This is Gizem, and today we will host Aslı Salihoğlu to talk about the UK's immigration policy and the changes caused by Brexit. Before moving on to the subject, let's get to know Aslı Salihoğlu briefly. Hello, Miss Aslı. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Could you please tell us about yourself and what you are currently busy with?
I am originally from Istanbul, but I'm currently doing a Ph.D. in migration studies in the UK. I've been working on migration issues for the better part of a decade, and specifically my area of research focuses on refugees' incorporation into labor markets. And my PhD actually studies Turkey as a case study.
Thank you. Then let's start with the first question. How many immigrants are there in the UK according to official records? How does the immigration process to the UK work?
Well, to start with the official records question, there are 66 million people in the UK as of 2020-2021. About 9.6 million of these 66 million people are immigrants by country of birth, meaning they were born outside of the UK. That corresponds to about 14.5% of the total population of the UK. And if you wanted to compare this figure to that of Turkey, for example, we find that there are 6 million migrants by country of birth in Turkey, meaning the migrants were born outside of Turkey. And this figure corresponds to a little more than 7% of the total population in Turkey in 2020. So proportionally speaking, the UK hosts twice the number of migrants hosted by Turkey. But a majority of the migrants hosted by the UK, unlike that of Turkey, are not refugees. So proportionally and distributionally speaking, these migrant cohorts are made up of different backgrounds and circumstances. And besides the national figures, we find that the migrant population of the UK is not equally distributed across the various regions in the UK. Specifically, most of the migrants in the UK live in urban places, with London hosting 37% of the total population of London is of migrant origin, for example. Whereas Wales, which is a devolved nation within the UK, the population in Wales, only 6.5% of it is migrant origin. So it's unequally distributed across the different nations that make up the UK, but also across the rural-urban divide as well. And moving on to your second question, which is, what is Britain's current immigration policy, was it?
Yeah, similar to that. How does the immigration process to the UK work? I have asked, so you can combine them too.
Okay, so the immigration process to the UK envisions several legal pathways to immigration into the UK. The kinds of pathways that I'm talking about here are not always permanent. So there are visitor visas for touristic visits, for example. But the bulk of the immigration flows that I'm guessing you want me to talk about are that of permanent or at least temporary migrants to the UK. And the temporary to permanent migration routes to the UK can fall under what I would say three main categories. Migrants that arrive for work-related purposes, migrants that arrive to study in the UK, and migrants that arrive for family reunification purposes, joining a family member that already lives in the UK and holds a settled status in the UK. And the UK immigration system, which has been recently overhauled post-Brexit, treats these categories separately, although there are ways in which you can transfer from one to another, meaning, for example, you can arrive to the UK on a student visa and upon graduation, perhaps find employment with a UK employer and switch to a work visa, and so on and so forth. There is no asylum visa, So really the only way you can claim asylum in the UK is if you first apply through legal means, meaning the UK government currently is trying to suppress all means of arriving to the UK through irregular paths and trying to encourage asylum through resettlement, which does not involve entry into the UK prior to the grantal of the refugee status. So, yeah, I hope that paints a picture.
Yeah, thank you. Then I would like to ask, has Brexit affected immigration policy? If so, why and how?
So Brexit has definitely affected immigration policy insofar as it has changed the incentives in place for migrants of different backgrounds to come in or not be enticed to come into the UK. What I mean by that is, even though the underlying factors that lead to demand for migrants, perhaps in particular sectors of the economy, or perhaps for the purposes of family reunification through diaspora communities and so on and so forth, they remain the same. But post-Brexit, the two-tier system that was in place that privileged European Union citizens and really was restrictive against the rest of the world is gone, which means that regardless of your nationality, you're almost on equal footing to come into the UK for long-term to temporary immigration purposes. In terms of the visitor visa, there are still tiers, I would say. Certain nationalities, certain passports do not require a visa to enter the UK, but I don't count that as immigration per se. So I want to focus on more the work-related or student study-related visas that I mentioned earlier. So on that count, post-Brexit, your nationality doesn't necessarily matter anymore, whereas before, being a citizen of a European Union country put you ahead of everybody else. And second of all, the immigration system was overhauled to entice not only high-skilled workers to come to the UK, but also middle-skilled workers as well. In the previous system, because there was freedom of movement within the EU, a lot of the low and middle skilled professions in the UK were readily filled by migrants coming from the EU. So the UK did not necessarily need to administer a separate visa policy for middle to low skilled workers. Whereas now, without freedom of movement from the EU and this ready stock of workers ready to fill jobs in the UK, the EU felt the need to introduce, or rather expand, the worker visa category so as to incentivize middle skilled workers to come as well. And when I say middle skilled, I mean, for example, electricians, plumbers, carpenters. So it's no longer just people who work in finance or people who are, high-level researchers at research universities. It's not just these backgrounds that are encouraged to apply for residency or temporary or permanent in the UK. It's also these middle income professions as well. So I would say overall, just to sum up, your nationality doesn't necessarily matter anymore per the rules, per the policy, in terms of your ability to seek a visa from the UK, especially for work purposes, and your skill level, as long as it meets the middle to upper level of skill definitions supplied by the UK government, is enough to apply for a work visa to the UK post-Brexit.
Okay, thank you for that. And you already mentioned a bit, but I would like to ask clearly. So what rights do immigrants in the UK have, and what rights are they deprived of? Has her exit from the European Union affected the rights of immigrants in the UK?
So it has affected the rights of immigrants to the UK for European Union citizens. Their rights have definitely changed. For much of the rest of the world, nothing much has changed. Like if you were an immigrant to the UK from a country outside of the EU, not much has changed for you. If you are thinking of immigrating to the UK and you hold the nationality of a country outside of the EU, things have become easier for you. So let's say that you've gotten to the UK, you hold legal status as an immigrant in the UK. Well, your rights depend on the exact status that you hold in the UK. A lot of first arrivals hold temporary residency in the UK. You don't immediately get permanent residency. And temporary visa holders, whether they be students or workers, they have no resource to public funds, which means that you don't get access to common welfare benefits, including unemployment insurance, for instance. Health is different, though. Upon every long-term immigration application, so even with study visas, the UK requires that you pay a certain healthcare surcharge upon your visa application to make sure that you're covering financially the costs of you potentially using the public healthcare system there while you live there. But besides, primary healthcare, other recourse to public funds is not available. And even in that instance, the applicant, the immigrant themselves have to pay upfront anyway. And for instance, for students who are on a temporary residence permit here, they also have a weekly cap on the hours that they can work. So there are certain limits, right? And for workers as well, they come to the UK with an employer having issued an acceptance letter to them, which means that their employment status and hence their visa status and immigration status is tied to this employer. They can't just come into the UK, quit their job with which they have been able to come to the UK and then just switch jobs or switch industries. They have to stick with that employer. If they want to switch, they need to go through another process of visa issuance again. So there's some immobility to your employment prospects in a sense. As for voting rights, with notable exceptions for Commonwealth citizens, they are not really available to most migrants. There are certain exceptions also for Scotland and Wales that have these devolved nations have given rights to settled migrants. So migrants that have permanent residency, but not necessarily citizenship, they get rights to vote in local elections in Scotland and Wales. But for the most part, especially for general elections, and by that I mean parliamentary elections, you cannot vote unless you are a citizen. So these are more or less common sense approaches that are found in most countries, I think. But what is maybe of note is the recent rollback on the humanitarian side of things in the UK because of the introduction of this status called temporary protection for arrivals to the UK by boat in the English Channel. So the UK, while trying to open up pathways to legal immigration for skilled migrants, medium or high skilled migrants, has also recently cracked down on irregular entries into the UK and has been very, very unwelcoming to humanitarian migrants and asylum applicants and so on and so forth. And they have introduced this medium tier humanitarian status called the temporary protection status that, unlike the regular full refugee status, does not automatically grant a right to settle in the UK, does not allow the temporary protection recipient to exercise their right to family reunion, and there is no recourse to public funds except in the cases of destitution. So they've introduced this medium tier humanitarian, quote unquote, status that actually doesn't give you much rights. And the point of it is to give the Home Office enough time for them to find a reason to kick you out, essentially. And in that way, there has been a setback to migrants' rights in a way in the UK. So there has been a move towards liberalization for a certain tier of migrants with skills and, educational backgrounds, but a rollback of rights for other circumstances and backgrounds.
I see. This information was really beneficial to us. Thank you for that. And I have only one last question. How is the immigrant phenomenon in the British political and media discourse? Are there any noticeable changes before and after Brexit? How would you interpret this situation?
Like most countries, British media is a diverse playground. So there are a multiplicity of voices. So depending on the publication that you're reading, you might get a different view as to the British viewpoint on migration. But I will say that coming up to the Brexit referendum, more and more so, the British public seemed to be anti-immigration generally and anti-EU immigration specifically. There was a lot of Euroscepticism, as it was called. And this was also borne out in public opinion surveys that were done at the time that showed specifically people who were born in the European Union outside of the UK, who were living in the UK around the time of the referendum, felt that they were more and more discriminated against. So you see an uptick in people reporting being discriminated against around the referendum if they were associated with the EU. So in general, Brexit steered the conversation in an anti-EU manner. But I also remember in the build up to the referendum, a big tactic on the Leave campaign was to antagonize the electorate against the possibility of Turkey joining the EU. And the assumption there was that if Turkey joins the EU, suddenly 80 million or so people from Turkey will just immigrate into the EU and a big portion of it will come to the UK. So there was a lot of scaremongering around Turkish immigration into the UK as part of the Leave campaign for Brexit. So I will say that, as with any country, immigration is instrumentalized for political ends. And migrants are often made to be these stereotypes that are conveniently used by often right-wing parties. But sometimes it doesn't matter. All parties of different backgrounds can engage in populist anti-immigrant rhetoric. It also exists in the UK, but Brexit specifically focused that negative attention on EU migrants and potential Turkish immigrants to the UK. And then actually post-Brexit, pandemic was also an interesting case study in terms of British political and media discourse, because suddenly the attention shifted away from EU migrants to a lot of East Asian migrants. So the public specifically started reporting negative attitudes towards Chinese migrants specifically. And this was because the media often tied the pandemic and the reasons behind the pandemic to China. And the public associated this particular link with immigration in return. And this negatively affected the way Chinese immigrants are treated in the UK as well. So it really depends. I think immigration is instrumentalized and weaponized by the media in Britain, just like anywhere else. But which nationality is at the forefront of discrimination in the UK really depends on what's happening and what the current events are at the time. And different nationalities kind of bear the burden of being discriminated against the most or talked about negatively the most, depending on what the news of the day are, essentially.
Okay, I see. Thanks for all this valuable information. We are really happy for having you today. Is there anything you would like to add to the discussion?
I actually would like to add, while media discourse does impact which nationalities are in focus in terms of anti-immigration rhetoric, there is, of course, systemic factors in place that especially affect established diaspora communities in the UK, like the Indian diaspora, Pakistani diaspora. They are large in number in the UK, and especially second and third generation migrants in these communities do experience racism and discrimination as well. Although their establishedness means that they're not constantly in the news cycle, right? So even though it might not be at the forefront in the headlines, they still experience anti-immigrant racism and discrimination. I just wanted to note that.
Okay, thank you for this note. So, dear listeners, this is the end of the discussion today. This is Gizem and Aslı Salihoğlu. We have talked about Britain's immigration policy and the effects of Brexit on that issue. Thanks for listening. See you next time in Roads to Migrate.